Proper decent tea. I went up. You're mute. That's it. He's on mute. That's
no
good.
one. I'm mute myself every week because when the cheesy music comes on, I'm in the background going, ding, ding, and I'm worried that one day you'll leave my mic on. Is that your Fortnum's tea? Is it?
This is my Fortnum's tea. I went past Fortnum's in St Pancras. Picked up a car in Luton. Yeah. I'm sure it's very nice in the sun. Is all I'll say. I'm sure it's very nice.
I think it's quite nice from about 35,000 feet.
Luton, feel free to defend yourself.
They were lovely people.
Personally, I slightly still prefer Devon. Slightly is all I'm saying. And my home county of Cornwall even better. So I'm not even loyal to my own county, mate. How's it been? You've got a little bit of news, haven't you, mate?
It's been a quiet week, mate. Nothing much has happened, if I'm honest. I mean, yeah.
How did that deadline go? You had a day in it before everything stopped.
What that was about? What was that about? Yes. For those who haven't been watching my social media or have had their head in the sand this week, oh my God, did it go down to the wire? So Finn's Law Part 2, obviously, it's been in Parliament. We were going to run out of time. It didn't look like it was going to happen. There's all sorts of stalls, and then they effectively stopped debating because they were worried about people's health in Parliament. So there were no more days to debate it. Everyone, all you guys, kicked up a fuss and said we want time to debate it. Parliament ended on, was it Thursday? Thursday the 29th at about 1 p.m. Finn's Law Part 2 was officially signed off and brought back into the House of Lords, and they dragged the Speaker from the House of Commons up the corridor to listen at about 12:30-ish. So with half an hour to go. It wasn't even that. It was literally with 5 minutes to go. Finn's Law Part 2 and a whole host of other laws were finally passed.
That's brilliant. And the relief. It's over, isn't it, mate? Is it over?
So it's a Finn's Law project, we called it. So it was to get protections for service animals and then to make sure they had meaningful sentences available if the judges do their bit. We've done it. That's it. I mean, I say the relief is incredible, and it is in it, and it's so exciting and it's so wonderful. And Kay and Mick and Lynn and people like that who have helped us all the way through, I think they all feel the same. It's incredible, and what a wonderful thing to have done. And there's thousands of people that helped us, but we're all left feeling a little bit lost.
Is that an anticlimax now?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We use this in dog training a lot. The wanting part of our brains is huge. It's massive. Just think about when you were getting a car, when you were getting a motorbike, Harry. You drooled over it. You bought magazines with it. You would look for the articles where it was for sale, and you would look at all the details, 0 to 60, and all that sort of stuff. And you worked hard and you saved hard, and then when it comes, you're like,
just giving it to the neighbour already. Bored of it. Yeah.
But it's an incredible feeling. But
You're right. It's those endorphins or whatever. We need some forensic bloke on here to explain it all. But that's scientific. That's slightly different medical. But anyway, for everyone out there, we do have a brilliant guest today. And we're going to introduce him in a minute, but it's Peter Arnold. He's fantastic. In the meantime, I just really wanted to mention PCSO Julia James, who was murdered recently. An absolutely tragic, horrible case of which I know very little about at the moment. So we're just going to have to wait for the formal releases of information rather than any speculation or anything like that. But it's absolutely tragic, and it's important we spread the word to... There could be someone out there, because I know with serious and fatal road traffic collisions, you could have a whole motorway of cars who've seen the collision. They all assume somebody else has reported something. So something suspicious in the area or something like that. So please do and spread the word and make sure that is out. Otherwise, apart from your incredible news, Dave, and that horrible piece of news there, bless her heart, everything sort of calmed down a little bit on the protest side of things and all that. So
I know. Fingers crossed it stays like that. Really, I think people have got something to do now. Their lives are everybody's lives are slowly opening up again, and hopefully it stay that way. There's a way to get as Finn's Law and Finn's Law Part 2 showed. There's a way to get your message across and to make things happen. And you know, peaceful protest is fine, but violent protest doesn't achieve anything.
Yeah, no, indeed, mate. Right.
I just want to say, before our guest comes on, I just want to say thank you to everybody on here who stuck with us through thick and thin for Finn's Law and Finn's Law Part 2. And, you know, a massive thank you to you. But if you have emailed your MP or a Lord, just send them a quick email just to say thanks, because quite often.
Yeah, that's true.
To hear thanks, a bit like the police, you know, often get to hear that word, thanks.
I was watching 24 Hours on A&E, and they were just saying how pleasurable it was to get a thank you. That's all it was, a thank you. And it just shows how rare a thank you is. I spoke to, you know, a good friend who was in the Police Federation, and some of the jobs he worked so hard. He was like the barrister's bagman or whatever, and they cleared them quite rightly, and he didn't even get a thank you. And that's all they want. You know, it's so important. It really psychs them out when they get a thank you. They don't know what to do with it. So it's good. But yes, shall we bring him on?
Well, I think he's going to be another one of these guests. No pressure, Peter, but I think it's going to be another one of these guests where we get to the end of an hour and we're like, we need another hour. We need another hour.
Yeah.
He's going to come on now and not say a word.
I'll warn you about this. Sophia Chowdhury-McCann is a good friend of mine, I would say now at the moment, but she is what's your title, Sophia? Come on, because she's a brilliant organizer, but she's a publicist basically, and she's got pretty much an agent for a few actors and things like that. And she supplied a few of the guests here, including she went to university with Peter, because they're all very clever people. Whilst I was doing my CSE grade 3 in French. Yeah. In Cornwall, right? They were doing this stuff. But anyway, he's the head of CSI. That's a cool. Is that an anagram, Dave, or not? It's not, is it?
Yeah.
CSI. Yeah. Anyway, crime scene investigation. And he's a lead in fatal and serious road traffic collision forensics, and the author, Val McDermid. This is I read. He's basically the Peter, who's coming on now, is the main number one chat. He's the first chapter in that. His first is brilliant because this author is a very, very successful novelist, and she is nothing. She doesn't know much about forensics either. And she wrote that. That was 2015, I think that was sometime. But and so the author Val McDermid, who's written several crime novels and this book on forensics, being an expert in her field, described him as a trim bundle of energy with the sharp eyes of a blackbird and an obvious enthusiasm for his job. And when I repeated that to him, he said, perhaps not so trim now, but I don't think he's so chunky either. And it's just some of the terms in that book, and I really recommend it. Because Peter Arnold's in there as well, as I just mentioned. What is a scene and a body? And it says basically that to the right listener, they tell us all about themselves, where they come from, how they lived, how they died, and who killed them, thanks to the messages left by a corpse, a crime scene, or the faintest of human traces. Forensic scientists can unlock the mysteries of the past and help justice to be done. And in Peter's own words, he said, the scene is the silent witness. So we just bring him on. There we go. Peter, how are you?
Hi, Harry. I'm good, thanks. You?
Great. Really Dave, good. Meet Peter.
Hi, Peter. You're right.
Hi, Dave. Congratulations on Finn's Law Part 2.
Thank you.
It's been a long, long time coming, lots of campaigning, and you haven't given up, and neither has any of your supporters. So well done indeed.
Appreciate that. Thanks very much, Peter. So we're joined by a scientist. I mean, this is beyond me and Harry. To be fair, me and Harry just sit here and say nothing while you blind us with science and how incredible your job is. Because you get to see some interesting stuff and meet some interesting people, and then you've got to try and unpick it all and put it all in place. You know, how did you get into that? What made you decide to school that you?
It's funny, really. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, when Harry first asked me whether I'd join you two for a chat. He said, how did you get into it? And I'm thinking about, and actually I remember now in secondary school actually going to a careers event at the Colchester Institute in Essex, where I'm from, and Essex Police, someone did a little demo about a crime scene, and a SOCO, scenes of crime officer, went in and recovered fingers. I remember nudging me mate and going, God, that looks like a really interesting job, doesn't it? But never thinking for the moment that anyone like me goes and does a job like that, because I didn't know anyone that worked for the police. I just thought that was a job for other people. Went through A-levels, was thinking I'd like to do medicine or be a paramedic, and I discovered part-time working at the pub, and I didn't perhaps get those A grades that I needed. And I remember looking around at other courses, because I definitely wanted to go to university. I definitely want to explore the world a bit more. And I went to Teesside University, and I did a forensic degree there. The university perspectives, it sold me some fascinating pictures, and I went and did that for 3 years. And it wasn't until my final year there, and I stayed on for another year to study information technology as well. And it wasn't really till my final year that I actually kind of felt I'd quite like to get into crime scene investigation. It wasn't something I perhaps was that keen on before. I thought it was a bit morbid. I didn't like the idea of death, dealing with dead people, blood and gore. But actually, as I learned more about the science, and particularly photography, I did a night class in photography to learn more about photography. I thought I'd love to be able to do photography and bring science as well. And what an amazing job. How cool does it sound to be a CSI? But I don't know anyone like me that does that job. So as I was still studying for my master's, I applied all over the country for CSI roles. I went for interviews with North Yorkshire, North Wales, Lincolnshire, Leicestershire. I even went and tried out for the MI5 in London as well. They didn't want me. Yeah, I didn't pass the tests. And eventually, I think West Yorkshire Police felt sorry for me, and I got my first job in forensics in Bradford as a vehicle examiner. So I examined stolen and recovered vehicles primarily.
Right.
And then my career kind of went from there. I was an old-fashioned SOCO, a scenes of crime officer, new fancy term is crime scene investigator. Did that in Bradford for 4.5 years. Very, very busy time, sort of 2003 for the next 4.5 years. Lots happened during that time in Bradford and in West Yorkshire, and some very unfortunate incidents we had to deal with. But career-wise, a lot of experience in a very short amount of time. And then I decided quite early on that my dream job would to be a CSI supervisor, somebody that's is in charge of the crime scenes, that leads people, that kind of can make a difference in terms of what we do day in, day out as well, and the way that we worked.
Just for anybody who doesn't understand what that role is, I mean, you're literally one of the most important people on that crime scene. You go there and you tell DIs and DCIs what needs to happen and why it needs to happen, don't you? You effectively run the scene.
So the role is a crime scene manager, and in some forces you don't need to be a supervisor to be a crime scene manager, but in the force that I worked for, West Yorkshire Police, you did, and you were very much decided, or certainly advised, on what the strategy was, what needed to be done in that scene in terms of forensics, how we are going to achieve it, who we need to come and help us, timescales that would need to be done. But I mean, you are in charge of that crime scene, but we wouldn't exactly tell officers what needs to happen, because we work very much with them, because ultimately there is a lead police officer, an SIO, senior investigating officer, and it's their head that, it's their head that's on the line if things go wrong. So we would certainly advise. And most of the time, the advice is taken, and we then manage that process throughout to the end.
It'd be a very unwise SIO to go against the CSI, the crime scene manager. That's for sure. But it's true. Go on, Dave.
No. I was just going to add, of course, the first officers that get there when all the chaos is still going on, they're kind of vital to your job and the results that come out of it. Sorry, go on, Harry, carry on.
Yeah, and going with that, in fact, and it's just the sort of thing where the frontline officers go to a scene or a murder scene or a robbery and whatever. And I know, Peter, you were directly involved in 2005 with PC's Teresa Milburn and Sharon Beshenevsky. Excuse me. Yeah, okay, and it was a national, well-known, and people will recognise a photograph. And I wish I'd tied in a screen. Didn't think I would need it, but there we go. So people will know that infamous that face of Sharon there, and she was desperately wanting to get back to her 4-year-old's birthday party, and she was. And again, this is mentioned in the book where you're interviewed initially. And the two officers, they attended this robbery because it was just down the road, and you were in the police station at the time, weren't you? Can you sort of recall that sort of thing happening from the radio calls coming in? And you obviously went on the radio, I imagine, but you soon caught on what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago now. That was about 15, 16 years ago now, wasn't it? And I'd probably only had about 2 or 3 years service as a crime scene investigator. But yeah, I was in the old Bradford police station, the Tyrrells. Half of it's now been converted into a lake, a city centre lake, but and our CSI office overlooked the road, just across the road where this incident happened. And I did actually happen to have an old police mask radio. You might remember them, an old police radio on at the time. And I just heard a code 0, and then I heard, because you only used to hear the operator side of the conversation, that there'd been shots fired and officers to assist, and there was an armed operation. But despite the fact that quite ordinarily you would send armed officers in first, I just remember looking out of the office and seeing a sea of police officers just running up the road, and your heart starts pounding and stuff. Yeah. What is going on here? And I remember the hair on the back of my neck standing up, and talking to the supervisor saying, "Shall I go up and find out what's going on?" And he sort of said, "Well, just give it 5-10 minutes, Pete. Let's just make sure it's safe first." And then, as soon as we could, I got myself up there to try and just bring some order to starting to preserve evidence. But obviously, there were some other priorities to deal with before we got involved.
But I know for 2 weeks you were involved from 7 a.m. to midnight on many of those. And what is it then? So we'll talk about DNA and all these, and some of the technical stuff like the 360 cameras and stuff and all that. But what is it then for people who really just have TV to go by? What is it you initially, when you approach the scene, what you're looking for, and what do you find is so invaluable for officers to have maintained before you get there, that scene management?
Yeah, well, that initial assessment is so important because you don't know what's there. You can't come up with a plan until you make an assessment. So you've really got to go into the scene very, very carefully, making sure that you're not destroying any potential evidence whilst you're doing it. But you've got to go in, you've got to go and make that assessment. You've got to have a really good look around. You've got to have an eye for detail. You've got to do it in a very logical way to make sure that you don't miss anything inceptive as well. And there's a classic phrase in forensic: every contact leaves a trace. Yeah. So you're constantly thinking, where have the suspects been? What have they come into contact with? And through that contact, what potential evidence could be left behind? So if they touched something, what DNA could there be? What could there be that we could find to identify? There could be a fingerprint. There could be DNA. But equally, if they may have brushed up against something, what could be transferred between the suspect and the item that they brushed up against? Could it be fibers? Could it be DNA? Could it be hair? And you carry out that initial assessment to then come up with what your plan is. But the most important thing is preserving that scene and making sure that you don't actually lose any evidence that you might need at a later time.
Yeah, well, I mean, quite often, and Harry would have been to big scenes and traffic scenes and stuff like that. And it is about literally leaving everything in place. Even if it's the Ambo crew have used all this equipment, no one clears up, no one takes their stuff and equipment away and puts it away. They leave it there because, like I said at the beginning, you get there after the chaos, but you kind of have to leave the chaos in place because something might have been disturbed or something now might be sitting on the ambulance crew's bag because they put it right there because they had no choice because they're trying to preserve life. It is a minefield. And I know in our initial training, Harry, you must be able to remember that far back, where they spend an awful lot of time talking about crime scene preservation to try and make the job as easy as possible for you guys. I mean, it's a minefield.
But also we live in the real world. We live in the real world where it rains and it snows as well. So whilst ideally you'll say, nobody touch anything, let's just leave it. Let's have a really good think about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. If it's about to rain, sometimes you have to make some really tricky decisions about about recovering things, about moving things, because if you don't, you're going to lose it anyway. So there's always priorities, and that's why you need a crime scene manager in there to come up with a strategy to decide what the priorities are and how we're going to achieve that as a team. Because quite often your priorities, we need more people down here, and we need them quick as well.
Yeah. Now I'm not on commission, Val McDermott, but basically what she says in there was in 1835 there was an incident, and before that justice came in with basically whether if you were strange to the area you were convicted, or it was basically on the color of your hair or whatever, it was you were convicted, and that's it really, as long as they got a conviction. And they even had some people confessing to murders even though they knew it wasn't them, but because they confessed it they went to the gallows. I mean, but in 1835 there was a butler, and he was trying to get money from his mistress, from the master, mistress, whatever. And so he shot a hole in the wall and then claimed that he'd fought off these robbers and stuff. But it was the first time that forensically, it was a known detective, got the bullet out of the wall, and it fitted the mold because people used to make their own bullets in the past. And from then on, they realized how important science, forensics was, and it's just gone from strength to strength. And I wanted to mention there was something that you may or may not recall, because it was in 2015, I think the book was written. Peter, it was something about a woman was murdered, and she had very bad head injuries. And they found that there was a sole print on there. And that, because they suspected that, was it ultraviolet and infrared soles of the trainer that then shone it up, and that revealed something else?
Yeah, I do. I remember that case, and it was in Halifax, and it was a young female that had been murdered in a flat, and she was taken. She wasn't there when, in fact, she was seriously assaulted in a flat. So when we went to examine the flat, she wasn't there. She was in hospital in intensive care, and unfortunately, several weeks later, I think it might have been New Year's Eve. Actually, she passed away. So we treated it quite early on as if it was a murder, because her condition was so serious. And one of my CSIs went to photograph her in intensive care because she had bruising and marks on her body, and we needed that for evidence. And she noticed some very strange bruising and shapes on her face. So she took a number of photographs, and then we realised actually it was a footwear mark. So we sent some of our specialist officers in who were trained to use infrared and ultraviolet photography and light sources, and they were able to actually, what wasn't very visible to the naked eye, you could actually see some very clear trainer marks on her face in various orientations. And actually, in the end, the evidence we provided to the jury and to the courts was that we could show that trainer had been stamped on her face on at least 8 different times, because there were 8 different prints that overlapped each other, and we employed the expertise of a footwear expert to do that. So that showed to a jury that someone didn't just accidentally trip over somebody. They stamped on them 8 times. They meant to do them some harm, and actually, as a result, I think the suspect got 30 years for that, because it was robbery and murder. Because it took some long,
and they could have been out in 5 years otherwise, committing more violence on other people. And all, I often think that when such a good case is brought together, and people say, "Oh, prison doesn't work, rehabilitation doesn't rehabilitate." Doesn't matter. They're in there, and they're not beating up my mother in the meantime. So if you give them the chances and they want to be rehabilitated, then great, let's do it. Let's work with them. But a lot don't want to do that. And therefore, how many potential victims are walking around having now not been victims that would have been otherwise? It's one of those little things I often think of. Maybe I should do something more useful.
It must still be an evolving science. Obviously, since the 1800s when Harry was born, we've obviously learned a lot. But I mean, I'm guessing it's still evolving, and we're still learning all the time. I mean, I don't know the terms, but I know low copy DNA used to be a big thing a few years ago. But with advancements, it's kind of almost normal now, is it?
Normal, yeah. Something that was deemed to be very specialist and new technology. We can get DNA from very low amounts, a DNA profile from very low amounts of DNA material. Now that's just normal, that's just routine. It brings about its complications because it is so sensitive. It also picks up some DNA information that's not relevant. But certainly on the DNA side, it's advanced massively. There are so many things that can be done now, and I won't pretend to understand the science because I don't anymore. There are people much more brainier than me that would be able to explain it, but there are advancements all the time. But the principles are still the same. The principles, every contact leaves a trace. Yeah. Everything that a suspect touches, there's a good chance that something's going to be left behind. And I suppose the advances are that we're becoming better and better. We have better technology to find what that something is, to find what has been left behind and possibly do something with it as well.
And it's a very relevant question there by Jellybean, who's been cleaning her bathrooms this morning. I know that from Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. Jellybean is a wonderful, wonderful lady, very good friend of mine. I've never met her, but I consider her a good friend. She's a good person. I suggest you follow her. And she wasn't born in 1901, I doubt. So now she'll kill me. But Peter, do you get asked to comment on the plausibility of planned scenes on TV entertainment programs, and also? What expectations do you think the public have that are probably realistic? Is there anything that you find, or generally are they pretty well informed nowadays?
Do you know, now and again we do get asked for assistance with some TV programs. I mean, at one point we always get asked to be extras on TV programs because we kind of can be realistic and know what we're doing, but we're not allowed. We're not allowed to do that because it's not deemed to be a good business interest and a conflict of interest with our daily role. But we won't get into that. But I think the most recent was probably a few years ago now. I was asked to provide some help for Happy Valley. And they were they wanted to mock up a CSI van and just wanted to know what one looked like. So I sent them a few pictures, gave them some advice. But aside from that, we don't get asked too much because actually the reality of our job, and if the dramas were realistic, they'd be boring. You just wouldn't want to watch them.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, we said that the other week, didn't we, Harry, on one of our lives? Yeah. And actually, the bill was entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, Line of Duty, it's fantastic. But one of those scenes, if you want to make it realistic, you'd have to make it 3 days long. They do it in about 30 seconds, don't they? Because I suppose that CSI Miami, I've watched one series of it, and it's like once you're a nurse, I think you can't watch Casualty because you scream at the TV.
Yeah.
I can't watch them. Line of Duty, I have to say, I'm well into that because I think it's brilliant. I really, really like that. The forensics is realistic on it, but it doesn't matter. It's interesting.
This is entertainment, yeah.
Yeah, it's entertainment, and it's really, really good. But like the guy in CSI Miami, is it Gresham or something? He just does everything, doesn't he? Interviews the suspects, finds the evidence, analyzes the evidence, interviews them, charges them, shoots them, handcuffs them, jail, does the judge and the jury.
I like the forensics. It's usually quite an attractive woman in a white overcoat that pops around and gets a full-on DNA result in about 3.5 seconds.
It all happens very, very quick. I mean, to be fair, a lot of the stuff that's in it is all possible, and for certain cases we can and we do some of that. But I think the problem is when you turn up to somebody that's had the shed broken into or the car has been broken into, we cannot deploy our full range of forensic techniques, a full team, because we just haven't got the resources to do it. We haven't got the people, we haven't got the money, and there you have to provide a proportionate service. And if somebody is expecting what they've seen on a TV drama, that they are going to be disappointed. And sometimes they really are, and it's down to my team to try and explain to the victims of crime, explain to them what we do, why we do it, so that they're not perhaps as disappointed as they would be. But ultimately, of course, we do turn up and we do work and we do get results, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be in a job, would we?
Yeah, no,
you were talking about in the book, and are we going to forgive Claire for sorry, David? Now she's just walked in and disturbed everyone, but come and sit down. Yeah, that's right. I'm glad he's had his second jab. That's brilliant. Lifetime forensics analysis. You go on there and you were getting quite interested in the fact that things needed to be quicker. You were getting your exhibits, and there was a lot of time wasted going to the police stations and sending these things off. Has there been any advances since then with that? And what was your involvement with it?
Yeah, I think certainly since that book has been written, there has been some advances. Particularly with fingerprints, traditionally, and this still happens a lot across the country. CSI will recover fingerprints from a crime scene, will use some kind of adhesive tape to remove the fingerprint from the surface. It would then be transported via courier, perhaps the next day, or perhaps on a weekly run to experts that can then scan the fingerprint, upload it to a system, and search nationally to try and identify whose fingerprints they are, or a manual check against a suspect. And there's just a lot of time wasted in between. If only when you find a fingerprint at the crime scene, an expert can look at it straight away. So we've invested in some technology across Yorkshire and the Humber. So our CSIs can now download, they can take a photograph of a finger mark using a close-up lens. They can download it to their tablet device. In fact, there's one in the background there. Download it to the tablet device. And then they can send it from the scene via a secure method, and it drops straight into our fingerprint system in this building that I'm in now. So I came to work today because the kids are just too noisy at home, so I thought I'll come do it from work. And the experts can analyse those fingerprints immediately, and it's now routine across Yorkshire and the Humber that CSIs, whether it's a shed break, whether your car's been broken into, or it's a murder, they will send their fingerprints direct from the crime scene, either whilst they're still in the crime scene or in their van afterwards, writing their reports or the conclusion of their examinations. They will send it direct, and within an hour, or certainly before they get back to the station by the end of the shift, we've identified suspects already. So that technology has moved on, and thank goodness it has, because it's really not that difficult, is it, to send a digital image to someone to have a look at? It shouldn't be that difficult, but this is policing. We've got to do all of it via secure methods. It's a lot more complicated than uploading an image to Facebook, and all the bureaucracy that goes with it. But that's certainly advanced, and that's happening. And there's a national project looking to bring that capability to all police forces across the UK. So certainly within the next 2 or 3 years, I'm hoping that is going to be routine wherever you live across the country, and it's about time, really.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. So we often say in the police family that if criminals were clever, we'd be out of a job. But you must come across crime scenes where people have gone to just that little bit extra effort, in their planning, to try and make sure your job is as hard or as impossible as they can be. Do you find those jobs more rewarding when you finally get there? How do you turn up to a crime scene? I think we had one in Hearts a good few years ago now, where it was an old chap had opened the front door and got shot. And they didn't even, when the people arrived, it was just an old man had fallen at his front door, and it wasn't for a good while. I think the body had gone back to the hospital before they realised that actually he'd been shot. And this person, it was literally, they walked to the front door, shot him and walked away, and there wasn't much, and it was in the middle of nowhere, and they really had to go. I'm not even sure if it's been solved yet, but when you get something like that, is it really that real gritty hard work? Is that more rewarding than the sort of bulk work? Or when you get to sit around a table and try and plan things out, what you're going to do next, who you're going to call in next? You must have to call, experts around the world, I guess, sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, those types of jobs, definitely more challenging. But you're right, at the end of it, when you actually are able to bring justice to the courts, and particularly if the courts find them guilty as well, that is incredibly rewarding. Now, I don't really do the job anymore. I kind of lead the regional unit, so I don't get that pleasure anymore, but I get a great deal of pleasure learning about how my team have achieved that and what they've achieved, because we have some incredible brains out there doing this job. Sorry, Harry, did you want to say something?
Now, yeah, my part, I had most experience watching the skills of collision investigators and the forensics that were going from there. And I used to always say, if you wanted to get rid of a body, just shove it in a car and throw it into a tree. And you actually have an incident where I think it was a colleague of yours or something. What happened there?
I won't take any credit for it. It was one of my colleagues. In fact, she is now head of the Forensic Collision Investigation Network for the UK. She came through the CSI route and career and became one of my managers. And now she's head of the National Network for Forensic Collision. She and a colleague just happened to go to a fatal road traffic collision. There was a family that was deceased, and it was only through her experience of seeing blood distribution at crime scenes that she looked in the car, she looked at what happened, and something just didn't add up. Couldn't put the finger on it, but something just didn't add up. The distribution, the way in things were in that car just puzzled and concerned her. And as a result of that, it turned out that the father had actually killed the children with a hammer, and then tried to cover it up by crashing the car. and causing the incident. And you know, had that experience and knowledge not been there, that may never have not been that cover up may never have been brought to justice. You know, it may not have got to the courts, or it might have been found out later on down the line, in which case we've lost quite a lot of evidence. So yeah, it does happen, and people clean up. You know, we've dealt with murder scenes, and we still do, unfortunately, where people have been killed. There is blood staining, and people go to inordinate lengths to get rid of the carpet, replace the carpet, wipe the walls down, but they can only see things with a naked eye, and we have a lot of technology. We use all sorts of light sources, ultraviolet, infrared, different wavelengths, and once we get in there and we see it through a very different pair of eyes, we can see things that others can't.
Just want to ask you quick, two good friends of mine have just qualified as victim recovery VR or crime scene
VVI.
And obviously they're just starting in their journey, but I've heard stories from around the country where, you know, those dogs have really helped to identify where people have gone to extraordinary efforts to try and clear up, or you know, potentially I spoke to the guy in Derbyshire who had the first seaman dog, who, you know, I think he got backing from the CSI department because they saw that dog could potentially save them a fortune by identifying one small piece of carpet rather than the whole carpet having to be rolled up and taken away for testing. Do your department work closely with VR dogs, or have you had good results with?
Yeah, almost every major scene we deal with, there is a big search that needs to happen, and we always bring in specialist search advisors for that. So quite often, as you know, there'll be specialist police officers that are trained in search techniques and search strategy, and they will be much more clued up than I or some of my colleagues will be in the different expertise we can tap into: semen sniffing dog, blood sniffing dog, cadaver sniffing dogs, archaeologists, anthropologists, drones, different kind of aerial footage we might have that's from all sorts of sources, because the suspects always, whether it's a domestic murder or if it's a stabbing in the street between two gangs, the suspects always flee. They go somewhere. They may have dropped evidence on their way. They may have concealed evidence, you know, as they've made their way out. And we've got to search all of that. So that's why, you know, when there is an incident, you'll find the whole block is cordoned off, or the whole street is blocked off, because we've got to search the drains, we've got to search the bushes, we've got to search gutters. They will go to all sorts of lengths to try and discard of the evidence. They'll throw their gun in the local quarry, and we might need to drain that quarry if we have to, or we'll send divers down to go and search. So it can be a massive task, but we absolutely use the expertise of police search advisors and the people that can actually do that job to narrow it down and more efficiently find that evidence.
So going from there, I just wanted to mention there was something, I've got to keep referring to this because this is where I got it from. But basically there was an incident in Wiltshire in 2011 when they had a prowling, a car going around and basically kidnapping women, raping them, and then releasing them. And this one girl, because of the information she got from CSI programs, she felt that even if I'm going to die, I'm going to leave my DNA here. And she ripped her hair out and put it in the car boot and basically spat on the seats. She thought at least she had some sort of satisfaction that there was a much bigger hope if they became a suspect that she'd be convicted. Luckily, she survived and he was convicted, and that evidence certainly helped to obviously to do that. And going on from that is like, what was your experience in court? Because it's all right getting it. And you know the evidence is there, but if you want to shortcut a little bit of detail and not auditing it correctly, it becomes unstuck, doesn't it? But you had an experience in court which you're glad you dotted your I's and crossed your T's, weren't you?
Yeah, it was horrendous experience. In fact, it was the first time I've ever given evidence in court, and I wish it was the last time as well. And it was a case where a nurse at Leeds Royal Infirmary had been hit over the head with something, an iron bar or something. She was really quite seriously injured. We didn't know if she'd been sexually assaulted or not, and she had her car stolen. and CID picked it up, and we found the car burnt out in the Manchester area. So I was asked to go and have a look at the car, and as you two will know, a burnt out car quite often, well, it's all burnt. There's not a lot left apart from rusty metal. So I went and had a look, and that's exactly how it looked. But because I'd been on a training course which talked about was about examining and excavating burnt out cars, I spent 2 days scouring through the mess, basically the ashes of what is inside the car, because you might think if it's got to thousands of degrees, there's nothing less, but actually that's not true, because when you have a plastic cigarette holder and it gets hot, the plastic melts around it and it actually protects the cigarettes inside. The same with the glove box, the same with the door channels that you have. The roof will collapse, melt and collapse in first, and actually protect some other parts of the car from the heat. So, using angle grinders, hammers, drills, chisels, anything I can get my hands onto. Actually, we managed to recover quite a bit of evidence. And one of the things that I did find, amongst all of the roof liner, all of the material from the back seats that had all burnt and kind of congealed into this big solid lump, underneath it all, I found a few pairs of triple extra large white Y fronts. And after speaking to the victim, it was quite obvious they weren't hers, they didn't belong to her, and it was all a bit puzzling, really. And we managed, because the fire and the debris had actually protected the Y fronts from the heat, we managed to obtain a DNA profile from the crotch area that had obviously been rubbing against the male's inner thigh, and that identified the suspect. And from there, we identified where he lived. And when we went, when the detectives went round to look at the flat where he lived, the flat had been on fire as well. So he'd set light to his own flat. But then on the mantelpiece, they found a candle holder that looked just like the sketch of the iron bar that the victim said she was hit over the head with as well. And I remember in court, it all hinged on this pair of Y fronts and his DNA profile, and why else would his DNA be on these Y fronts? And I remember I was in the box for about 3 hours in total, about an hour with prosecution in chief talking through all the detail of what I did, why I did it. And it was getting a bit boring, to be honest, but I think he was purposely trying to ensure that the jury understood the level of detail that we went to make sure that everything's recovered properly, documented properly. There's no mix-up or mistakes been made here. And then the last 2 hours was the defence barrister, who, after a little bit of pushing and trying to ask me, how many mistakes have I made in my career? Why on my report did I not document something? And perhaps I forgot to do it. What else have I possibly forgot to do? He just come out of it and said, well, I tell you, Mr. Arnold, my client, and I put it to you that that's not his DNA evidence there. It's either you've planted it there, you've planted those underpants in the bag, or there's been some kind of mistake and you've contaminated the evidence. And I kind of chuckled. And then the prosecution barrister got up and said, Mr. Arnold, why do you give that reaction? And I said, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I said, I will examine those pants here in the courtroom if you really want me to, and I'll confirm via my photography that they are definitely the underpants that I found in that vehicle. And then, to my surprise, the judge agreed to recess. We got the necessary white scene suits, the nitrile gloves, my mask. And in the courtroom, I opened the packaging. I got the underpants out in front of the jury. I had my photographs, and I was able to demonstrate to the jury, in the room, that even the burn pattern to the labelling is exactly the same as the photograph that I took back in, I even remember the date, it was November the 25th, and that was the photograph I took at the scene. So to try and suggest that I put them in the bag or got them from somewhere else is absolutely ridiculous. And when you've got jury members sort of smiling and nodding at you, you're thinking, right, I think we've got my point across. I mean, underneath I was shaking like a leaf. My legs are like Elvis legs underneath. And in hindsight, I think that was brilliant. It was like theatre, and it was fantastic. But I'm glad I don't go to court anymore, and hopefully I never will do. I think a lot of my cases are way gone now.
It is something else, isn't it? Court. It really is. The fact that those people are allowed to stand there and effectively call you a liar, and you're thinking, just doing my job.
And I remember,
based on what?
I remember taking it personally as well. And I had to said in court, why on earth would I put my career and my livelihood and my reputation online and lie? But actually, you realise as well, it's important that the defence test the evidence. It's important that they check you're not a liar. And it's important that they check that everything is tickety-boo.
Well, actually, on that point, there have been, I mean, not recently, but there have been, you know, miscarriages of justice where one bit of evidence has been stored next to, and we didn't have the sealing procedures we have now, and that was contaminated with that, and there's, you know, and cases have gone awry because of that. So yeah, you're right. It is right, and of course,
and I think it helps to build public trust in the justice system. If somebody's found guilty at court, then there's a pretty good chance that they have actually done it. And what we don't want, the worst thing is that people go down who are innocent, and that is not what we want at all. I would rather the evidence, personally, I'd rather the evidence is tested and some guilty people walk free than people that are not guilty spend their life in bars. That isn't what any of us want, I don't think.
Can we answer that question, please, Pete? How do you manage to get the right resources, skill sets ready? Is there a central team? Well, you're regional, aren't you? You're in charge of the whole thing. It's run a bit like MPAS, isn't it? Yeah, it's a bit like the National Police Air Service. So I'm responsible for, amongst other things, crime scene investigation across the Yorkshire and Humber region. So that's CSI services to North Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Humberside and West Yorkshire Police. I'm not a police officer. I'm employed by the police as a civilian employee. That's important because I saw one of the questions was saying, you know, do you have to do forensics after you've done your police academy training? We're employed as forensic experts. And I also have a dedicated CSI training team and a training school. So that's how we get the skills ready, and we do it to accredited standards as well. There's a long mentor period. CSIs now have to be assessed to accredited standards and continually assessed as well to make sure that we do things as it should be done. But in terms of deploying the resources, sorry, Dave, what was that?
There's someone behind you. It looks like someone's about to knock on your door.
Diane's going. We've got to see Diane.
Bye, Diane.
Hi, Diane. You might know Diane from Twitter. What's your handle on Twitter, Diane?
I've met Dave before.
It's Diane Faircloth. Delectable Di.
Hi.
Di's in on Twitter
today.
See ya.
Harry doesn't follow you.
No, Harry doesn't.
Harry.
You don't follow on Twitter.
What? I'll do it now. Come on, let's get this bloody admin sorted out. Yeah, send me the. Yeah.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks for your efforts.
Cheers.
Yeah. I'm sure I told her I was doing this. It doesn't matter. I was saying now. But what were we on about? Oh yeah, so that's in terms of getting people skilled and ready for the job, and then in terms of deploying people to the scene, just downstairs actually. We're the only force or organisation in the country. We have a dedicated forensic control room. So we have 24 people that work 24 hours, 3 teams of 7 plus a supervisor. So if any of the 4 police forces want a CSI or a collision investigator or a specialist imaging officer for whatever reason, we're linked in with all of their IT systems, and they can send the request in real time to us, and then we manage all of our forensic resources across the region on our dedicated command and control system, a bit like the National Police Air Service, the Highways Agency, the ambulance. And so we can very, very quickly mobilise specialist skills from nearly 200 CSI staff. That includes, we've got forensic vehicle examiners, crime scene investigators, senior crime scene investigators, area forensic managers, and we can mobilise them across the region really easily. Prior to that, we'd have a murder in a small force and everything else would have to stop. Whereas now we can just parachute people in and it's seamless.
Dave, I'm considering Peter is quite safe, because if anyone did him over, they wouldn't get away with it, would they? I reckon he's got there'd be a fair few people after who they were.
Yeah. Keep telling my wife that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about 360 cameras that you do when you go into a scene and things, because I do use a little bit in road traffic collisions and things like that, and how that sort of developed, and that can help a jury really.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not really new technology anymore, is it? Because you can actually go out and spend a few £100 and buy a 360 camera. But certainly, you know, when it was mentioned in Val's book, it was still quite a new thing. So yeah, as one of the first things we do when we've made our initial assessment of the crime scene, again, we're talking major crime here, we will use a variety of methods to record the scene, because you just don't know what's going to be relevant at a later time. You just don't know. And if you move something, you pick something up, or at a later time you go, oh, was there anything like that in the crime scene? So photography is the first thing we do. We photograph everything from every angle of the room, from top, from bottom. But then there's other things that we can use. So we video. We bring in our specialist imaging officers to come and do a video walkthrough of the scene, perhaps a video walkthrough of where the suspects have been or where the victims have been. 360 photography is another thing that we do. So we've got a number of devices where you can. Now you just hold them up in the middle of the room, you take a picture, and it stitches it all together. So you can then build a virtual crime scene if you need it to present to a court at a later time, or for the investigation team. We also do 3D scanning fairly regularly. So like you see at building sites or at fatal collisions, we'll do a 3D laser scan of the scene. We'll capture everything in 3D. So again, if we need to do a reconstruction at a later time, we've got that information captured. Shootings is a great one where we do use 3D technology, because you can at a later time show a jury the trajectory of any bullets that have been fired. So we do that, and we have access to drones as well. Drones have become, certainly a few years ago, they were like the in thing. Now everybody's got one, but we have our own drone pilots as well that will come to crime scenes, and they are licensed to be able to fly in built-up areas as well. So we have a multitude of ways that we can record a scene, and we don't always use them all, but when it's relevant, we will.
Yeah, incredible. I like the quote that Harry used at the beginning, and we have a similar-ish quote in dog training, in that dogs do talk, but only those that know how to listen to them can hear what they're saying. And it's like you say, that's like the crime scene. It's everything's there. It's just waiting for you to listen, if you like, to find your evidence. Now, and I don't. The next thing I'm going to ask you, I don't mean to make light of the job you do, or the job that we do, or crime scenes, or anything like that. But over your extensive career, there must have been some boopers. There must, or even in training, there must have been some things. I don't know, maybe
training, but not by
the trainer set up, and you accused the wrong person because of this, that, and the other. I'm not saying you would do that in your real life, but there must have been some good old boopers across your career. Anything you can share with us?
You put me on the spot now, and I'm really, really struggling.
We'll leave her anonymous, but somebody went to uni with you.
Yeah.
Oh, there was that in training. Yeah. So, well, we're new. We're not quite sure what we're doing, but yeah, there was this time. My friend Sophia, and we.
You said her name.
And she was dealing with a crime scene at university, and she was getting a bit hungry and a bit thirsty. So she had a can of pop and a crisps, but she forgot to remove a can of pop and crisps from the crime scene, and we ended up dealing with it as evidence. And actually had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But actually, that does happen sometimes in real life as well. You'll have members of the public stood at cordons, eating the sweets, drinking the drink, and they'll throw the rubbish on the ground. And then later on, we come along and we find it. We think it's potential evidence. So it does happen in real life as well sometimes.
I do remember one, a major incident in Devon and Cornwall many years ago. That covers it, doesn't it? But it was sort of a big search by, I think it was Tactical Aid Group, they were called then. And so it was a good open ground search. And they'd had, you have these grab bags, these lunches, dinners, sandwiches in a bag and all that. And I think it was something like a half-eaten sandwich and something. And of course, it goes across the force. Was any search person eating a beef and thingy sandwich? You can imagine the person go, "Oh my God!" It's before we do a very expensive DNA search. Sophia, bless her heart, she is brilliant. She's because I couldn't get her what she did. What was the title? Because she does so much. She's a brilliant person. I'd suggest you follow her.
She's a publicist. She's also head of marketing and communications for a local arts centre. Well, not just local, it's over the North Lancashire way as well. And she does a bit of agent. She's an agent as well for some very.
She is. She's brilliant.
She does everything.
So enthusiastic. She is.
Yeah,
she is. Sophia Can One.
Together.
There you go. Sophia Can One. Follow her. She's really fascinating. Sophia with an F, because I spelled it twice now with a PH, and she sends a rolling eyes emoji, and I know what I've done wrong. But she's great, and she supplied a few of the guests on here, so it's really good. And it's through her that, Peter, because I know you are so modest and humble. It's like, why would anyone want to speak to me? I work in an office now. It's so, and yet I think we know it's not the case.
It's true.
But I
just do spreadsheets all day, write strategies. That's all I do.
But you also, Devon and Cornwall has now joined the national side of the scenes of crime, because now we used to have, as a collision investigator, a senior investigating officer at these scenes, our SOCO used to come from the other side of the force area, which could be a 2-hour wait by the time they were on a call out, brought out, and whatever. And now the collision investigators are doing. They have these super duper Nikon cameras and things, but that's all come from you again, hasn't it? I believe. Yeah, you were ahead. It's because of you that you're pushing this out international. So it's not sort of a postcode lottery about how well your investigation goes on. The millions of pounds for every hour that is by blocking off the M1 to get things done so much quicker is so important. If you do that in Devon and Cornwall, it's like sometimes it's into £50, but it's they'll kill me for that.
No, it's true. There's a lot of when you've got an incident on the motorway, whether it's a fatal or potential fatal collision or even a crime scene, there is a lot of pressure to get that road open, because, like you said, for every minute that the M1 or the M62 is closed, that is millions of pounds lost to the UK economy. And you have the Highways Agency, they want it open as soon as possible. I've been told even the Home Secretary has been on the phone before saying, I want the motorway open. But we've got to do our job properly. You've only got one chance to recover that evidence. If you just do it quickly and then let cars drive all over the evidence, that's it. You'll never have it again. And you've got to do it properly, because it's not just a crash. Someone's lost their life. Someone might be culpable for it. Someone may have even been murdered, and the family want answers, and they deserve the answers. And if that was a member of my family or one of my friends, I want that road closed all day and know that a proper job has been done. And it doesn't wind me up. So it winds me up when people complain about having to wait in traffic. Well, at least you haven't died. So,
And the argument is that you can, if someone's murdered in a house, you can cordon that off, and sometimes it's closed for forensic examination for weeks, even 2 weeks. Where we're just asking 6 to 8 hours in a fatal road traffic collision, and I think, and it's investigated in the same way for people listening. Is that it's all adjacent to it used to be the murder manual, and so the road death investigation manual, cheerful title, was alongside, and so that's where us SIOs would be going through, and now it's the APP. Boring title, should be called something much nicer.
What does APP stand for? Sorry, what does APP stand for, Harry? Someone asked me that the other day. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I have to Google each time, and it's really uninteresting. Is it
authorised professional practice?
Oh, it might be.
Yes, it is. That's one. See, boring title. We need some more death in there, I think.
Oh, look.
There's Finn. Finn here. Somebody's asking for a look of Finn.
He's molting at the moment.
I'm not suggesting anything, Dave, but he looks a bit stuffed there. Are you sure
he's had a busy day? He's been at the dog training.
Is he? Are you sure you haven't stuffed him just to get to the end? No? Okay. Looks like you need a forensic examiner in there just to confirm whether that's the case or not.
Long as
he is.
Yeah, done that. Yeah, we can do that.
See, I don't know if that dog, who is genuinely the most attractive German Shepherd I've ever known, or if it's because it's always next to Dave that he looks so attractive. I don't know. It's one of those.
I know.
It is so true. But putting all this around, this is why this country is not only the most tolerant country in the world when you think about it, with all these protests going on and things like that. We need to remind ourselves that we're very safe relative. You don't feel that if you're the victim or your close relative is the victim, but generally those very sort of two-dimensional statistics do actually show we're very safe. And it's because we put so much effort into it. And people like yourself, Peter, that have this really professional approach. And there is also, it's sort of nothing is held back in order to find the truth. And that's why we're able to live in relative safety, really, isn't it? Dave, you all right there, mate?
Yeah, Mum.
See, this is it. Right, I'm going to actually. Oh yeah, here we go. I'm going to make you there you go. There's the hero of the moment. He is breathing. I can see him breathing now. That's fine. That's good. There you go. He is the best.
He's all the fuss is about this week. all about him.
Is he 12? He's 12 now, isn't he?
Yeah. He's tired. He's been out for 8 hours today, so he's tired. Bless him. So am I.
Ladies and gents,
Peter, we've hit that hour. There's so much I wanted to.
Jesus! Wow,
that is an hour gone. That's an hour gone, guys.
So we're going to drag you back on there again at some stage. Yeah,
and then we can get some more gossip on Sophia as well.
Plenty to give you. Yeah.
Ladies and gents, I think that's it. I think it is 5 o'clock. It's time to go. Stay safe.